eating this wonderful green pasture and foraging. I mean, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. This is what it's supposed to be. This is where your food is supposed to come from. Not a neat little package in the grocery store where you're relying on someone else to make sure that it gets to you. It's supposed to be able to be straight out your back door, straight from your neighbor. Let's get back to that. Hey guys, welcome to 3 Mississippi. Sid here. Today we're going to be continuing what we're calling our food bank series, and we've talked about starting your seeds and up potting your seeds and the importance of kind of storing your food. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the animal aspect of that, from small scale to a little bit larger scale, and what you can do to be a little bit more food self-sustainable and ready for whatever comes next. I'm also going to show you how to set up a really simple, easy, and relatively inexpensive and reusable brooder to get you started with your birds. Let's get to it. I've got some goslings that are coming in, and I need to set up my temporary brooder. As those of you that have been following the channel know, we have been working on building our new chicken coop out here in Mississippi. You know, we had to start over. We didn't have any animal structures here when we got here, and so we're currently putting some final and finishing touches on the chicken coop, and hopefully we'll have that done in the next 2 to 3 weeks when our first batch of meat chickens get here. Now, we're keeping it small this year. We're only doing 50. Some of you might think that that sounds like a lot of birds, but if you think about how much chicken the average family eats in a year, 50 birds is not very much. We used to do hundreds of birds a year. We would do a few for ourselves, and then the rest we would sell. Now, chickens are not your only option for meat, and I get a lot of people asking if they have a small backyard, or maybe they live in an HOA within the city limits, that they're saying, well, I can't raise my own meat. What am I supposed to do? My answer to that is, yes, you can still raise your own meat. You just have to be smart about it. You still have lots of great options for wonderful proteins for your family. Now, even within city limits, there are a lot of places that will allow you to still have a few laying hens. Maybe they have a no rooster ordinance, but you can still probably have some laying hens, and that will at least give you a supply of eggs. Now, you will have to invest in new birds every couple of years to keep your supply consistent, but that is a start. It is a starting point for somebody who has limits on what they're allowed to have in their own yard. Now, again, thinking of a small, within the city limits housing situation with maybe a smaller yard and not as much room, your other options, especially if there's very close neighbors and you're worried about maybe the noise of the chickens, my 2 other favorite options for you people are quail and rabbits. Now, I personally have never raised rabbits for meat. It has been on our to-do list for a while. Right about when we were getting ready to do it, we ended up moving here, so that plan got pushed back a ways. But that's okay. We are still going to do it at some point here in the near future, but right now, again, like I said, we're getting established with the coop and getting those things ready. That being said, quail are a great option. Let me tell you why I love quail so much for people. They are quiet. There's no ordinances in most places regarding quail because nobody really thinks that much about them. They are a very easy to raise bird. You do not need a large pen for them. And it's very, very simple to be able to turn them over. In fact, if you have just a few roosters and a couple of hens, you can crank those eggs out, incubate them yourself. They incubate very quickly. The turnover rate from the time that they reach maturity, they start laying eggs themselves at about 8 weeks. You take those eggs and you incubate them, if they're fertilized, of course, then you've got yourself about 2 weeks of incubation time. They usually hatch somewhere between the 14 to 16 day, sometimes as early as 12 or 13. I've had that happen too. They will hatch out and you brood them and you're good to go. Because their cycle is so fast, they also don't quite live as long as a lot of other birds. After about a year and a half, their laying will slow down. Some birds might live longer. There are different species of quail, but if we're just talking strictly like Coturnix quail, which is a much smaller quail, for them, I would say you're going to want to start rotating them through, or you're going to have severe slowdown in reproduction. And for a small backyard operation that you're using to feed your family with their eggs and with their meat, 100% you're going to want to keep a breeding cycle going, and occasionally you may need to bring in new blood. That is going to be true with any kind of livestock that you're breeding, whether it's big or small. Eventually you have to bring in fresh blood to keep the lines going. Now, another reason I love quail for small areas is you can get a very small cage or a stacked quail cage that has dividers. You can build something yourself if you need to, very inexpensively. It's all dependent on your budget and what you have available. You can even do them in your garage, just keeping mindful of the temperature changes, especially, when it's going to be very, very hot or very, very cold where you are. These are all things that you'd have to consider with anything that you were doing, whether it was plant, vegetable, mineral, whatever. You got to think about the temperature and the conditions. But with quail, the really, really cool thing about it is you can hatch a bird out from an egg. In 8 weeks, they're laying eggs. When they're laying eggs, you can then process them for meat. So every 6 to 8 weeks, I say 8 weeks to be err on the side of caution for everybody. In 8 weeks, you've got another round of meat from that last hatch group. And I'll tell you this from my experience, I would say on average, 3 to 4 quail would feed, an average person. Usually for me, 2 does it. For Mike, usually more like 3 or 4. And then their eggs, 3 quail eggs is the size roughly of 1 chicken egg, but they are packed with actually so much more nutrients and vitamins and minerals that they are actually considered to be much healthier for you than regular chicken eggs. Now, granted, if you're raising your own chickens that are free ranging out on pastures like you see behind me, and they're eating bugs and grasses and weeds and flowers and all those wonderful things, their eggs are going to have a lot more of those really healthy omegas and those wonderful vitamins in them for you. So you're probably getting a lot better sources from the eggs that you're raising if you have the ability to give them that. Now, I know, again, if you're in a small area, you're thinking, well, I don't have a giant pasture to put my birds on, and I'm not going to be pasturing quail. No, you're not. But you can do trays of fodder. So easy. And that's something we'll talk about in another video. I'll touch on it here briefly for you guys. But fodder trays, there's different kinds of things. We'll use barley for an example. You can take barley, you get a tray, like a grow tray, you spread it out, you water it, you soak it, you let it grow, and then it grows up. And then you give that to the birds. You put the birds in it, and the birds will eat it. So even if you don't have a giant pasture like I do behind me, and you've got a small postage stamp somewhere in the city, you can still be increasing the vitamins that your birds are getting from giving them fresh greens like that. Even if it's just, maybe you have a small garden with like some greens, or maybe you eat a lot of salads and you're buying it at the store, and that's fine, but you're giving them some of the scraps. That's good too. Whatever you can do in those terms, think of the least amount of things that you are throwing into the trash, that you're either feeding to your animals that you're not eating. And I'll tell you one thing, when you do that, when you're thinking about what you're eating and what you can feed to your animals that's going to make them healthier, it will keep you eating things that are more healthy. It will keep you from eating the processed junk food that was in a bag, because you don't want to feed that to your animals. If you won't feed it to your animals, don't feed it to yourself. Now, guys, obviously I don't have any quail right now, but this is my quail cage. It is a Winola Ranch quail cage that wasn't too far away from where we lived in California. They are a made in America company, which we love, and really good quality cages. Now, granted, this one is not fully put together right now. A lot of the feeder trays and the water trays are up top because we had to disassemble it to a degree in order to haul it from California to Mississippi. But it's a really high quality cage. If you keep your quail in a small yard like that, in a pen like that, you're going to have meat, you're going to have eggs, and you can also breed some and sell some to some neighbors maybe. I mean, that is sustainability. That's the ability to feed your family, feed yourself, maybe feed your friends, maybe make a little bit of profit back on some of the feed that you're feeding them. Now, quail don't eat a whole lot. They're little birds, and they're easy to process. So for people that are maybe a little bit intimidated by larger animals or are intimidated by raising and having to process rabbits because they're cute and cuddly and all of that, quail is an excellent place to start. I highly recommend starting with quail, especially if you've got limited space, limited time, and limited funds, because you can start them really inexpensively. Forget that fancy cage I just showed you, okay? If you get yourself a small little like dog crate that has a small enough gauge wire, that will work. I mean, they don't need, you don't want them in a flight pen. You're not raising them to be hunting birds. That's a whole different thing. You don't need them in a flight pen. They just need enough room to live for a few weeks, and keep them fed, keep their water clean, make sure they always have access to water. That's really an important one for quail, which I know sounds weird to say because all animals need water, but quail, if you let their water get empty for even just an hour or two, sometimes it can mess up their egg production permanently. There's just a weird little quirk of theirs. Rabbits, a wonderful source of protein. You can also, obviously, again, you can breed them, you can sell them. They're quiet, not a lot of noisy rabbits. Maybe during breeding season they do get a little bit, but for the most part, they're a pretty quiet animal to raise in the backyard. There's no ordinance against them within the city limits and things like that. Nobody's going to know that you have them, even if it were to be against your HOA rules, unless they peek over your fence, kind of thing. Now, I'm not advocating breaking rules or breaking laws in your area, but I am advocating for you being more self-sufficient and more self-sustainable. And if that means doing what you have to do to provide for your family, then that's what that means. Processing rabbits, of course, it is a fuzzy, cuddly looking creature. Some people really have a hard time with that. If that is not something that is up your alley, I imagine you probably wouldn't be watching this video. It's important to know where our food comes from. It's important to know the sacrifice and the effort that goes into that food that nourishes our bodies. And part of that process is sometimes harvesting an animal. And if that's not something that you're comfortable with, then go full vegan now, because you're buying it at the store under conditions that I will guarantee you are not nearly as good as what you will be able to give those animals. And that's my hard, firm stance on that. I am 100% believer in, if you are not capable or at least understand and can comprehend that there is a sacrifice that is made there, and somebody is the one that has to take this animal and process it, then you shouldn't be using any animal products at all, 100%, because that is just a fact. That if you're going to use any animal products, you have to understand that somebody had to take care of it. And why not cut out the middleman and learn to do it for yourself? Learn that skill. We have so many videos on our channel of talking about processing animals and raising your own meat and growing your own garden and harvesting your own seeds. And all of these things are wonderful skills that I am happy to see kind of coming back and people getting excited about, because I get excited about it. There's nothing will ever compare. You will never order chicken in a restaurant again when you've had your own chicken, because it will not taste the same to you. It will not be as good. The quality level is 110 million times better. Anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. When I started this with Mike, I always knew someday that I wanted to do this, that I wanted to do these things, but we never lived in an area where we could. We had an HOA. Mike had a garden, but that was our limit at the time. We couldn't have anything else. Quail were not on my radar. Rabbits were not on my radar. I was a new mom, and I think I just had other things on my mind at the time. But the more and more that we got into being more self-sufficient and more self-sustainable and being able to rely on ourselves a little bit more, the more that we learned and researched and did hands-on, the more and more grateful that I was that I was open to it and that I was excited to learn it, put an egg in the incubator and watch it develop and watch it hatch and grow it out and harvest that animal and feed your family. It's wonderful. And people are going to tell you, you know, the cost of this and the cost of that. Let's talk about that. Look, I'm not going to lie to you guys. It costs a little bit of money to get started with some of these things. You have to get the animals from someone. You can start small. You can grow it out. So don't go out like with quail, for example, don't go out and buy 100 quail and a big fancy expensive cage, because number one, you don't know if you're going to like it. You don't know if this is for you. It's not for everybody. While you might be able to appreciate it and understand where your food comes, it's not for everybody to do it themselves. And that's okay too. So what I always recommend to people, start small, baby steps. Get yourself a handful of hens, you know, like maybe 5 quail hens and maybe like 1 roux. Get a small little cage, like a little travel dog pen that you can put them in to start with. Collect those eggs every day. When you got a few saved up, get yourself you can get an incubator pretty inexpensively. Now, they're not always the best, but quail are pretty resilient when it comes to hatching out. It's not like with ducks or peafowl or geese where sometimes you have to, they're a little bit more finicky with the hatch out. So you don't have to worry about all your levels quite as much, I've noticed, with the quail. They're a little bit more resilient, and they develop so quickly that they're just itching to bust out of that shell. But I would say this, I would start small. I would get yourself, you know, an inexpensive incubator, maybe find somebody that's selling one used that you can make sure you clean it out really well and start, you know, for as little as like $60, I think I've seen them for, maybe $100 if you want to get one that's a little bit more, you know. Get yourself that incubator and start doing it. And so you can literally get started with that pretty inexpensively. Now, chickens, again, depends on your setup outside. This is long term for a lot of birds, so we're kind of going big on it. Now, we have done it before with things with reclaimed wood and different pens and cages that we helped friends build out of, you know, scraps that they had laying around and metal that we built them small little ones. You can go to Tractor Supply and buy one for like 250 bucks for, you know, that'll hold maybe like 4 hens. You have options a lot less expensive. You can find deals, you can find people that are moving, that are rehoming their birds maybe. Now, maybe that's not the ideal way to start, but it's a good way to get your feet wet before you commit financially. Because part of being smart about being sustainable is not going for broke, not buying all the most expensive, coolest breeds of chicken and the biggest, fanciest stuff until you're sure it's for you. So as you can see in this water trough, there's a lot of different ways to brood birds. And this is a really great temporary setup, or one that you can do yourself in your garage. I like to use pine shavings. I know some people like to use paper towels. I like pine shavings. These are great to compost afterwards. So when it's time to change them out while you're still brooding the birds, you just compost this whole thing, dump it out, you know, put the birds in a carrier or something, and just add your pine shavings and let them do their thing. So the other thing you need to think about when you're brooding birds is that you're going to need heat, food, and water. And then obviously you want to make sure they're safe from predators. So for us right now, these guys are going to be kept in the garage, especially since we are still having a frost this week, hopefully our last one of the season before it's officially really spring. But I've got an extension cord that I've run over from the back wall of the garage. And I know a lot of people like to use heat lamps. I got off heat lamps years ago once I discovered these. You can get these on our Amazon store. In fact, there's a link down there below for this item. These are the heat plates that I like to use. They've been very reliable. They grow with your bird. So as you see these legs here, there's a little push button here, and you can move these up or down. So when your birds are young and little, you're going to have this closer to the ground because the bird is closer to the ground. If you're doing a larger bird like geese or ducklings, you're going to raise it up, or as they grow, you're going to raise it up so that it's higher off the ground because the bird is taller. So it just depends on what you're brooding, and you're going to want to raise it up over time to help them feather out as well. The great thing about these heat plates is they are not a fire hazard. You don't have to worry about them touching your hay, touching your shavings, touching a piece of wood, and catching your barn, catching your brooder, catching your garage on fire. Many a house fire has been started by a heat lamp in a garage that the clamp didn't stay and it fell and touched that. Also with heat lamps, they tend to be a little too much, I find, for the birds, especially when they're real young. I have found that I have a better rate of survival, less pasty butt, and less issues with the birds feathering out. It's much easier to raise the plate gradually, and you're not getting some that you get, I call them nuked birds. Occasionally you get one bird that ends up kind of cooking themselves a little bit under a heat lamp. They get too close to it or it's too low, and that bird is just particularly susceptible to it, and they kind of just cook themselves, as it were. I don't have that problem as much using the heat plate as I did with heat lamps. So for me, it's 100% heat plates. I prefer them. They're safer, they're better. It's a more even heat. It's not going to burn them to the touch. Whereas if the heat lamp falls and drops down and they can touch the bulb, it will burn them and potentially start a fire. So the last thing you want is pre-fried chicken.
So this is a real easy brooder to set up, guys. Something to put the chick feed in. I've used bowls and things before when all of my other regular feeders were in use. It also depends on what you're brooding, whether it's, you know, a chicken. These are goslings. Hi, babies. So, hi, sweet peas. So I wanted to get something that they couldn't kind of flop around in and scatter as much. And then some kind of a waterer so that they can access their water without getting themselves too wet or potentially drowning themselves. If it's quail, I use a nipple system for the quail because they will drown themselves. And then I always put it up on some kind of a block. I have a big block of wood, scrap wood under here to keep it a little elevated so they don't step in it as much, and it helps keep the shavings out of it. But real simple, guys. One of these water troughs, I mean, I've used a galvanized metal one that I had laying around before. You can use a tote like this if you like a Rubbermaid tote. This is a simple brooder. I mean, if you have a small backyard and you're doing a couple of chickens, you can easily set this brooder up in your garage and be rocking and rolling. I wouldn't put too many birds in here that you were gonna grow out to be ready to go outside in the coop. I would say with chickens, I wouldn't do any more than maybe 6 in here, this size water trough.
But as we're slipping into spring here, guys, this is the time. If you've been contemplating starting any backyard livestock, this is the time. People are going to start posting that they have chicks for sale, that they have, coveys of quail that maybe they're selling, or that they've got, kits for sale, which are baby rabbits, for those of you that don't know what a kit is. You'll be able to meet people in your area that are doing the same thing. Pick their brain, ask them questions. There is nothing that a homesteader or a farmer loves more than talking about their homestead and their farm and what they raise and what they do and how they do it. They are happy to answer your questions. We love this lifestyle and we love sharing that knowledge. So if somebody's genuinely interested and has questions, don't be shy to ask the person that you're wanting to buy birds from, or that you're buying the used cage from, or don't be shy to ask. It's okay, because when you're able to, even on a small scale, in a small backyard with a few quail, all the way to acres and acres of green pastures that we're going to be filling up with sheep and birds and chicken tractors and meat birds out here eating this wonderful green pasture and foraging. I mean, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. This is what it's supposed to be. This is where your food is supposed to come from. Not a neat little package in the grocery store where you're relying on someone else to make sure that it gets to you. It's supposed to be able to be straight out your back door, straight from your neighbor. Let's get back to that. And this food bank series, I feel very passionately about it, guys. We have talked about this subject so much, and I know that some of you might say, oh, we hear this from everybody. And I get that. And I am not a doomsday person. I'm not the person that's going to tell you that, civilization's collapsing tomorrow, the end is nigh. That's not me. I like to be prepared. for when bad things happen. I like to consider myself prepared and a planner and somebody who can take care of themselves in some ways outside of maybe some of the societal norms that we might consider. With all of that being said, it's so much better for you when you know where your food came from. It's so much better for your kids. You're just going to be healthier, you're going to be happier. Just the amount of enjoyment you get from sitting and watching your birds, holding that baby quail, holding that baby chick, all of that stuff. Um, my cat just sprayed me with hay. He's over here digging on the Bunko's always got to make an appearance. He's been following me around. You got to know that the nutrient level, the effort, the care that you're putting into it, it's an investment in the beginning. Yes. Yes, it can be expensive if you don't take it small when you start. Don't dive in head first. Whatever it is you're trying to do to be more sustainable, even if it's, whether it's starting your garden, whether it's getting some quail or some rabbit, whatever it is, even if it's just something as simple as you've organized a pantry in your garage and you're filling it with cans, don't buy everything all at once. Do it in stages. Do it over time. Rotate your stock. The same can be said for any aspect of being sustainable. It's just important. It's going to keep you from feeling overwhelmed or like you bit off more than you can chew. And it'll keep you from feeling like you're failing or you messed up, because that's easy to do too. When you try to do too much too fast with some of this, it can be overwhelming and you can make mistakes because you're not able to really examine and dive into it the way that you would if you started out with one thing on a smaller scale instead of trying to do everything all at once. If it takes you a couple of years to get your garden going, to get maybe your little covey of quail going, to get all these things in motion, that's okay. The fact that you're starting that journey and you're learning how to preserve your food and you're learning how to raise it yourself and you're learning how to cultivate whatever little spot on the planet that you have, that is a huge step. I applaud you for it. Or even if you're just interested in it, that's the first step. You're watching this video, you were at least a little bit interested in what that means to be a little bit more independent. We fight so hard when we're teenagers to be like independent from our parents and do stuff on our own. And then all of a sudden, as soon as we're adults and we're on our own, we're like, corporate America, the big box stores, the government, we expect them to take care of us. Well, you just moved out of your parents' house so you could be independent and on your own. And you're taking a step backwards by 100% relying on all of those other things and people to take care of you. So let's take it back to being more self-sufficient, being more independent, and having some of those things for ourselves. Because I think that sounds like the kind of America that I want to live in. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys. I appreciate you. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed. And until then, safety's off. Bye.